Hi, I'm Kim, and today I want to talk about a policy that will help support people with Asperger syndrome in the workplace. So, people with Asperger syndrome can often have many different strengths and skills that can make them very valuable employees. Unfortunately, they can also face certain barriers in the workplace. So, Barbara Bissonette, who wrote an article called Avoiding Misunderstandings in the Neurotypical Workplace, and I will include all these references at the end of my white paper. She talks about how people with Asperger syndrome can often struggle with different sensory issues, also with different executive functioning issues, and all of these things can create particular barriers for people who are trying to be successful in the work environment. People with Asperger syndrome also may have more challenges in understanding unwritten social expectations or understanding where every workplace has a particular culture, and they just may have more trouble picking up on what is expected of them. And this can create misunderstandings both with their colleagues and with their supervisors, and can create a lot of challenges that can make it hard for someone to succeed, even if they have the skills that they need to be great at their job. So it's important to remember that employers, obviously there's quite a bit of variation. Some employers are much more aware of Asperger syndrome and much more supportive, and then there's a whole spectrum. But in general, offices tend to be arranged or structured around the needs of someone who would be considered neurotypical versus someone who has Asperger syndrome. And so then people with Asperger syndrome, they are in a position where they then need to explain or ask for any type of accommodations that they may need. And where Asperger syndrome is considered a hidden disability, people may not be aware of it or see it from the outside. This can sometimes leave people in an awkward position of trying to explain or justify why they may need a particular accommodation. So Barbara Bissonette, in her article, she also talks about some different strategies that can help people with Asperger syndrome to be more successful in the workplace and to overcome some of these barriers. And so some of the suggestions are things like maybe talking to, getting feedback from a trusted colleague or friend about how certain behaviors may come across, or preparing ahead of time for how to discuss certain challenges with an employer or with their supervisor if issues come up. And I think these are helpful suggestions, but at the same time, they're just focused on the individual. And they ignore challenges within the environment itself. So as we've discussed in class, disjuncture occurs when there is a misfit between the individual and the environment. And as Dr. DePoy and Dr. Gilson talk about in studying disability, disjuncture is a continuum, it's not a binary. So some employers, obviously, as we said, are more supportive than others. But I believe that this policy, no matter what the starting point is, I believe that this policy will be beneficial in all workplaces. I should also clarify that this is an embedded policy. So even though I'm focusing more on Asperger syndrome as I talk about this policy, the policy itself will be written not exclusively to Asperger syndrome. It will be broader than that, so that while it would support people with Asperger syndrome in particular, it also would be supportive to people with other challenges, or really anyone, in creating a more supportive work environment and a better fit between the employee and the employer in the work environment. So there are 3 different components to this policy. The first is that as part of orientation, the employer will be required to survey all new employees and collect information about things such as their learning style, their work style, and any information that might be relevant, any barriers that might make it more challenging for them to be successful in their job. This will allow them to be aware up front of any particular challenges that the employee might face. This is, and again, this would not be. This would be for everyone to take this. So it wouldn't just apply to people with Asperger syndrome. Although some of the information collected would be specific to particular challenges that people with Asperger syndrome can typically face. According to Jamie Freed of the Asperger Autism Network, which is in Watertown, Massachusetts, people with Asperger syndrome can vary very widely in their symptoms. And so even though there are typical symptoms, someone with Asperger syndrome may not even fit that particular stereotype. So this policy, again, even for people with Asperger syndrome, there's such variation that really it's important just to find out the particular needs of the employee. So that's the first component of the policy, is collecting this information, much more specific information than is generally collected when an employee starts. The second aspect of the policy then is that the employer needs to take this information, and working collaboratively with the employee, they need to figure out some solutions or particular accommodations that they can make. And this again is where concerns about cost sometimes come in, which is valid. But at the same time, I think that there are creative ways that employers can work with employees to try to make adjustments. So if an employee has a lot of sensory issues and maybe really has trouble working in a louder environment, the employer may have a private office that they can offer. If they don't, maybe there's a way that they can move the employee's desk to the side of the room, or offer noise-canceling headphones, or just little steps that they can take to try to increase the chance for success. And maybe they make changes to how they communicate, how the supervisor would communicate information to that employee. So they use the information from step one of the policy to make adjustments to help create a successful environment for the employee. And then the third step is that where there are often a lot of just different cultures in different offices and unwritten expectations, and often it's just kind of assumed that everyone will be able to pick up on that information. But some people, particularly with Asperger syndrome, may not be able to do that. So the third aspect of this policy is that employers will be required to have written information detailing some of those expectations. And this may require having a consultation with someone who's knowledgeable about Asperger syndrome to help brainstorm some information that should go in there. But to have written information so that the employee knows up front and can be better prepared for what is expected of them. So this policy, for employees, I think the main potential drawback is that they may not want to disclose some of the information about themselves. But they would be required to take the questionnaire, but again, it would be their choice what information they disclose. So I think that those issues could be not too big of an issue, because it's what they decide to tell their employer. But it's just giving them the opportunity upfront to do that in a way that is not singling them out. It's not stigmatizing them, but it's asking upfront. And for the employer, again, it's the challenge of cost. But I believe that there will be a lot of benefits to the employer because they'll be creating a more supportive work environment, increasing office satisfaction. Excuse me. I believe that they'll see a lot of benefits in productivity, which may not completely recoup the costs, but I believe will at least help in that way. So for this policy, I focused on the ethical model of equality of opportunity. So from the Stanford article about distributive justice, they talk about how in a race, if the starting line is staggered, it's just simply not a fair race. And I think that's the case here. If different employees are starting and they don't have the same, they don't enter the workplace with the same knowledge and skills about what's needed in that particular work environment, it's hard to expect them to have the same results. So this policy gives people the resources that they need to really set people up for success, and I believe it can create a much more healthy work environment and be really beneficial both to the employer and to the employee. Thank you.